Well, I feel like before it would have been just a very, like, she, I can only imagine that she would have been, like, very religious and, like, in, very, like, she followed all of the purity rules. Traditional, and was very, strict about following those rules.
Well, and she obviously, like, knew some religion, or, like, was familiar, because she talks about, like, this is not what we do in Israel. Like, very clearly, like, this is not what the people of God are supposed to do.
And afterwards, she might not have been, like, angry at God, that I think most of us probably immediately would have that assumption of anger, but rather, like, shamefulness. Like, instead of being, like, angry with God for letting this happen to her, more of, like, now she feels she's not worthy because she's no longer pure.
Yeah, and I think, like, a lot of rape victims today may feel like that it was their fault they got raped, and, it's shameful for them.
As opposed to, like, other sins that happen. Like, a lot of times we're quick to blame.
Yeah.
But, like, with rape, it seems more of, like, a shameful thing.
I mean, I can only imagine, like, what her thought process is, like, if she's living in this house for the rest of her life, like, she's stuck with this, like, family, like David, who wouldn't, like, provide justice for her, and with her brother who raped her, and her cousin who, like, gave the idea that they should do this, and then she's like, she's not going to get married after this, like, she's not going to have that, like, life that I'm sure she envisioned for herself, and so just to, like, stay in this house and be there is, I can't imagine how she would have felt.
I also think it's interesting there's no, like, other female, like, role models for her to, like, look up to, especially because her father had many wives, and, so it's interesting that, would it be different if, like, King David did have, like, a more stable relationship, like, had a wife that was there, and, like, maybe she would have stepped in and said something, or...
That or King David himself might have even felt different about the woman.
Yeah.
Or just, like, about women in general.
Yeah,
like, just ideals about women would
Was
be
he
different.
the one? I'm sorry, I haven't brushed up on this, but was he the one where one of his wives, before they got married, he saw her, like, bathing on a rooftop?
Yeah,
Bathsheba.
Yeah, that's,
So-
like, right before this.
So that's
Killed her
kind of showing that
husband
he's a possession,
yeah.
or she's a possession.
Yeah. And there is, like, an article about how, like, Amnon kind of followed in King David's, like, footsteps with that, whereas he, like, looked at, like, at Tamar as, like, an object, and, like, he used, like, aggressive behavior just like King David did with Bathsheba.
Mm-hmm.
So just, like, how did he look at King David as a role model? Okay, so just a quote from an article I used was, from biblical times to the present age, the Psalms have nourished and enriched the prayer lives of women in public and private worship. Jewish and Christian women alike have found their thoughts, their needs, and their life experience reflected in the text of the Psalms. So we're going to go to Psalm 23. Anna, you can start reading.
Okay.
Or,
Sorry.
no, it doesn't
Sorry.
matter.
Did you want to start while I find it?
Sure. And we're just gonna Psalm 23, you said?
Yeah.
The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Okay. So thinking back to how Tamar's relationship with God would be after the rape, how do you think she would use this psalm to, like, cope with the aftermath of the rape, or how would she use this psalm for, like, worship, or to, like, relate to her life experience? Anything that, like, sticks out?
Well, recovering from being raped seems like a dark valley to me.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And he also talks about in here, he restores my soul, and in the bottom of your Bible, Hannah, it talks about or life. So I think maybe kind of revamping him.
I think she can draw a lot of comfort from this, but I also think it's interesting. So, just kind of thinking like how someone who's been raped might like look at this. Like, I've looked at this with other songs as well, but like, he makes me lie down, and for you are always with me, and like that kind of language with, just like always being there and like always kind of like controlling. I think. And sometimes, like, if someone's had, like, a traumatic experience, like, that can be detrimental as well. But, I mean, those are really small parts of this, and I don't think that it would.
Makes sense, though. I think it is very controlling.
But I do think she could get, like, a lot of comfort from this and, like, that kind of, like, restoration of life and promise of comfort.
What do you think of the part that says, it's verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies? Like, how do you think Tamar would think about that? Like, her enemies is kind of like her family members that kind of didn't help her out afterwards. Like, how do you think she would, like, interpret that part?
I just think the promise of, like, the strength that even though, like, you're amongst your enemies, like, God will be there to, like, protect and, like, guide you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I feel like it's also, like, very, like, it's, like, a very, like, serving, like, you prepare a table. Like, you're the one doing the work, and I am the guest, you know? Even though, like, I'm with all these people who I do not like.
There's like a side note in my Bible about that. It just has like side notes to like explain what it means or whatever.
Yeah.
And mine says that like as my enemies watch, my enemies see that I am God's friend and God's guest. Is like how it like breaks that down, that you sit at a table before me as my enemies watch, because like is what mine says.
Mm-hmm.
So just like knowing that like I'm the righteous one, like you will be reprimanded in the kingdom of heaven, and like I am God's friend or I'm God's daughter, so I will be safe in the long run type.
Yeah. And eventually Amnon does get killed by his brother. So, like,
He had it coming.
he had it coming. Anything else with Psalm 23? Okay. Well, how can we relate these texts to today's world?
I feel like the figure of Tamar could be like, while it's like super unknown, I feel like it could be a source of strength for people who have been raped. Like the strength of like remaining in like trusting God and like understanding that this is, you know, not feeling like not blaming God, but like accepting what has happened and moving on with your, you know, like moving forward and still following God.
It kind of goes into not being ashamed of what happens too, since she did like rip the robe and all that kind of thing, instead of like rape victims who just like hide themselves. Like this is sort of more like, all right, listen, it happened, and we need to like try and address the problem, not stand by the sidelines.
Well, and even just like, you know, for people who are like supporters of those who have been sexually assaulted, like sexual assault is still such a stigmatized, like shameful thing to talk about. That like, you know, it's hard for a lot of people to even admit that like someone that you love could be a victim, because like there's so much shame that goes along with that.
and I might be way off on this, but like even knowing that crimes like this happened when God's presence was probably the most known at any time of history. You know what I mean? Like to know that that still happened at the point when, I mean, God was a very feared figure, you know? So like maybe that reassurance that, you know, there's other people that have experienced this, you know, and that they might not have justice, but you like could.
Yeah. Moving on. What can the church do to break the silence against gender-based violence?
Can you repeat it one more time? What was it?
Yeah, what can the church do to break the silence against gender-based violence?
Well, churches can come out and say, and like actually talk about it, which doesn't happen. I mean, even at Concordia, it doesn't happen. People don't talk about sexual assault, like, and it happens here. You know, just like the whole like reputation, like forgetting about a reputation, I think is like a first step to like moving to solve like issues, especially around gender-based violence.
And I also think that like starting smaller too, like just addressing other issues that have gender biases in them. Because I know like in the Catholic Church, there's a ton of gender biases. You know what I mean? Just because like it's a very old-fashioned type way of doing church. So a lot of times like if stuff like that would happen, like there's still that older view that like in this text here that like women are meant to serve aspect. So
Yeah.
I think even like addressing like smaller gender issues can make like the larger ones maybe a little more easier.
Well, and I think even churches like addressing biblical passages that talk about gender, because I think like I like grew up in a Protestant denomination, and it was like, you know, you read what someone had picked for you, this section, and that was what it was for the week. And I go to a church here that is like a gospel-based church, and so we like go through like whole books of the Bible at a time. And like, you know, there was a passage about gender, and I had never heard it before. And I grew up, and it was talking about like gender roles in like leadership positions in the church. And you know, just like things even like that, like addressing why things are done the way that they are, and like drawing from a biblical base, but also like talking about them in a modern like fashion.
It's one of those things they could also start like at a younger age too, like in youth group or like confirmation or something like that. Just have it be like put out there, so that way you're like getting more like acclimated to the idea at a younger age instead of being where we are and not like hearing verses or knowing what certain aspects are.
Yeah, I feel like we repeat a lot of the same stories in the church, and like a lot of them obviously are very important. But yeah, some of these ones that like don't get read as much, and it's because like, you know, they have more of like a negative outlook, or you know. Yeah. Any last